Wyoming Territory, 1881. The wind howled over the plains like it was grieving something lost, and Beatrice Monroe signed her name with shaking fingers on a slip of paper that promised her food, shelter, and work in exchange for her silence. Her 2 children slept just feet away, curled on a straw mattress in the corner of a drafty bunkhouse. Daisy was 6 and Daniel had just turned 4. Beatrice had not eaten since the day before, and the bruises along her ribs still ached from the last time her late husband's brother had decided she was disrespectful. Now, with her husband dead and the man who called himself her caretaker demanding payment for her stay, she had no choice. The contract was from a cattle broker out of Cheyenne. Room and board in exchange for kitchen work and cleaning until debts were paid. She signed it to survive. 3 months, the broker had said. Then you're free to go. You and the kids. But she knew better. There was always another debt. Another excuse. Beatrice folded the paper and tucked it into her skirt pocket as the door creaked open behind her. "You got anything worth cooking, Mrs. Monroe?" a new voice asked. She turned, startled. The man standing there was tall, lean but broad through the shoulders. His coat was dusted with road and wind, his hat low over eyes the color of storm clouds. He looked at the children, then back at her, his jaw tight. "I do not know who you are," she said, putting herself between him and the children. He took off his hat. "Name's Xander Holt. I just came in from the southern range. Franklin told me a new house girl was coming on. I figured I'd introduce myself." She studied him. There was something different about him. Not soft but not cold either. Just quiet, steady. He looked like a man who did not speak unless he meant it. "I am Beatrice," she said slowly. "These are my children." Xander's eyes didn't move from hers. "I figured. You signed that contract because you had no other choice." Her throat tightened. She nodded. He looked toward the bunkhouse window, where the wind was throwing snow sideways against the glass. "You deserve love," he said, like it was not something he meant to say out loud. "Not just shelter." Beatrice stood still, not breathing. "I will not bother you," he added. "Just thought you should hear it from someone." Then he turned and walked out into the storm. The next morning, Beatrice woke early to start the biscuits. She worked in silence, kneading dough with tired hands, watching the sky turn from gray to pale blue through the frosted window. She was used to being invisible. That was safest. But Xander was already outside, chopping wood in the yard. His shirt clung to his back with sweat despite the cold, and his movements were efficient, rhythmic. He did not look at her window, but he must have known she was watching. She tried to ignore the way her stomach fluttered. She had not known kindness in years. Not real kindness. By noon, she was scrubbing floors in the main house when her son's voice screamed from the barn. "Daniel!" she shouted, bolting for the door. She ran so fast she slipped on the icy step, her palms scraping wood. But she kept going, heart pounding. She found him trapped under a stack of loose hay bales, crying, his leg pinned. Before she could reach him, Xander was already there. He lifted the bales with one arm and pulled Daniel free, cradling the boy against his chest like he weighed nothing. Beatrice fell to her knees beside them. "Is he bleeding? Is it broken?" Xander shook his head. "Just scared. Maybe bruised." Daniel clung to him, sniffling. "Mama, he saved me." Beatrice reached out, brushing hair from her boy's face, her hands shaking. "Thank God." Xander looked at her then. "He is your whole world." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Yes." He helped her stand. "Then he is mine too, if you will let him be." Her breath caught. He set Daniel down gently, then looked at her, eyes steady. "No strings, no contracts, just a promise." She stared at him, heart thudding. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because you deserve more than survival." Over the next 3 weeks, Xander kept his word. He never overstepped, never pushed, but he was always there, fixing the broken latch on their bunkhouse door, bringing daisy-sweet honey apples he found near the creek, teaching Daniel how to hold a stick like a lasso. Beatrice watched him with growing confusion and warmth. He never asked anything of her, never treated her like she owed him something. One evening, she found him sitting by the fire outside, sharpening a whittling knife. She sat beside him, close but not touching. "You do not even know me," she said. Xander glanced at her. "I know you get up before the sun and go to sleep long after it's gone. I know you carry your children like they are your lungs. I know you flinch when someone raises their voice. And I know you still stand up straight anyway." She blinked fast, looking away. "I know enough," he said quietly. Beatrice folded her hands in her lap. "I have not felt safe in a long time." He looked over at her. "Do you feel safe now?" She nodded, eyes wet. "With you?" "Yes." Xander let out a slow breath. "Then I will never leave. Not unless you ask me to." She looked at him, really looked. His jaw was rough with stubble, his hands calloused, but gentle. There was something in his eyes she had not seen in years. Hope. "I do not want you to leave," she said. He reached out then, slow and careful, his hand brushing hers. She did not pull away. She gripped back, and for the first time in a long time she smiled. By early February, the winds had turned glassy and dry, sweeping hard across the flats like they were polishing the bones of winter clean. The snow had crusted into pale drifts along the fence lines, and the cattle, ribs showing sharp beneath their hides, clustered tighter around the feed troughs. Xander spent most days on horseback, checking fence breaks and hauling hay to the back pastures, but he always circled back by dusk. Beatrice had taken over the kitchen in the main house. The older cook, Mrs. Halpern, had fallen on the cellar steps and cracked her hip, and Franklin, always more concerned with economy than fairness, had pressed Beatrice into the role without ceremony. She didn't argue. The work was harder, but it put her near the wood stove and gave her first say over what scraps might warm her children's bellies. One evening, she found Xander outside the tack shed, sleeves rolled to his elbows, mending a leather bridle with a bone needle and rawhide thong. "Did you ride out past the North Bluff today?" she asked, handing him a folded square of cornbread wrapped in cloth. He took it, eyebrows lifting slightly. "I did. Snow's thinning up there. Coyotes are moving in closer. Something pulled a chicken off the coop rail last night. Left feathers in the snow." He nodded, chewing slowly. "I'll set a snare near the roost before first light." Beatrice leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You always take on more than's asked of you." "I don't mind," he said. Then, after a beat, "You've never once asked for help, Beatrice. Not even when you needed it most." Her gaze drifted away. "I stopped believing help came without cost." Xander laid the bridle aside. "Do you believe I'm different?" "I want to," she said. "But I have to think of more than myself now." He stood, brushing his palms on his trousers. "Then let me carry some of that weight. I've got broad shoulders and nowhere else to be." She watched the last light catch in his hair, the wind lifting the corner of his collar. If she let herself believe it, she might hope too much. And hope could burn worse than hunger. "I'll think on it," she whispered. That night Daniel had a fever. Beatrice pressed wet cloths to his forehead while Daisy curled against her side, thumb in her mouth. She didn't sleep, just watched the rise and fall of her son's chest, lips moving in a silent prayer she hadn't dared in years. At dawn, the door creaked open and Xander stepped inside, quiet as breath. He held a tin cup steaming faintly in the cold. "Willow bark tea," he said. "Helps with fever. My mother used it when my brother got the ague." Beatrice took it, fingers brushing his. Thank you. He glanced at Daniel, then to her. You're not alone anymore. I hope you know that. She wanted to answer, but her throat tightened. Instead, she reached out and touched his sleeve, just for a moment. He didn't move, just let her hand rest there, steadying herself. The fever broke by midday. Daniel stirred, mumbling for bread, and Beatrice wept quietly against the wall, shoulders shaking with relief. The next afternoon, Franklin called her into the stable. He stood beside a wagon, ledger book in hand. You've cleared the debt, he said. Cook wages covered what your husband owed. You're free to go. Beatrice blinked. Go where? He shrugged. That's not my concern. You're no longer on contract. When she stepped out into the yard, stunned, Xander was splitting kindling near the grain shed. She walked straight to him. I'm not beholden anymore, she said. He leaned on the axe handle, searching her face. Then where will you go? She looked toward the distant hills, then back at him. I don't want to leave, not if there's a reason to stay. His voice was quiet. There is. Beatrice stepped closer. I've stopped waiting for someone to rescue me, but I think I'm ready to build something. If it's with someone who understands what it means to start from nothing. Xander nodded once. I've been waiting for you to say that. She reached for his hand, and this time he didn't hesitate. They stood there in the brittle light, the sound of a windmill creaking in the distance, and the first real thaw began not in the earth, but in her chest. Late February brought a sudden thaw. The snow melted into deep ruts along the wagon tracks, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine sap. Beatrice stood at the edge of the vegetable plot, boots sinking into mud, sleeves rolled past her elbows. She was turning the soil with a rusted spade, testing what might grow come spring. Behind her, Daisy played with a rag doll near the porch steps while Daniel helped Xander sort nails in the shed. She straightened slowly, wiping her forehead with the back of her arm just as Xander emerged from the barn, hammer tucked under one arm, a strip of canvas slung over his shoulder. There's a leak over the mule stall, he said. I'll patch it before dusk. Beatrice leaned on the spade. You always find work where no one's asked for it. He looked down at the mud between them. Maybe I just like fixing what's broken. She stepped out of the row, brushing dirt from her skirt. Or maybe you're better at seeing what needs care. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced toward Daisy, who was now trying to tie the doll's bonnet with sticky fingers. She started humming when she plays, he said. Not loud, just soft, like she's forgotten to be afraid. Beatrice followed his gaze. She hasn't done that since before. She's safe now, he said. Beatrice's hand found the edge of her apron, curled tightly in her fist. I know. And I don't want to waste what we've come to. Xander shifted the canvas on his shoulder. Then don't. She stepped closer, just enough that the scent of sawdust and horses lingered between them. If we stay, we'll need more than patched roofs and stew pots. We'll need something that holds through the hard seasons. He nodded. I've been thinking the same. You have? She asked, voice low. I've got 50 acres north of the butte, he said. Land my father claimed before he passed. Needs clearing, fencing, a cabin built from scratch. But it's good soil. Water from a spring. I've been holding on to it, waiting for something worth building for. Beatrice's breath caught, but she didn't speak. I could start hauling lumber in spring, he continued. It'll take time, and it won't be easy. But I'd rather build slow with you than fast with anyone else. She looked at the ground, the mud clinging thick to both their boots. I've never been asked what I want, she said. I'm asking now. She raised her eyes. Then I want to go with you. I want the land, the work, the quiet. I want a life we build with our own hands, where the children can run free and no one owns our time but us. His hand settled gently at her elbow, not pulling, just anchoring. Then we'll start with the first fence post. One board at a time. That night, after the children were asleep, Beatrice sat on the porch with a lamp flickering at her side and a scrap of paper in her lap. She was drafting a list: seeds they'd need, tools to borrow, how many jars she'd need to put up preserves come summer. The moon was high, casting silver across the yard, and she didn't hear Xander approach until his shadow fell across the step. He sat beside her, close but easy. "You always plan this far ahead?" She smiled faintly. "I've lived too long reacting. I want to choose things now, even the small ones." He looked out toward the dark fields. "I'd like to build the cabin with a loft. Give Daisy and Daniel their own space." Beatrice nodded. "And a root cellar. I can't go through another winter without one." He leaned back on his hands. "I'd like to put a bench out front. Somewhere to sit when the work's done." She turned to him, her voice steady. "We'll have all of it, because we'll make it ourselves." The wind stirred the hem of her shawl, and she didn't pull it tighter. She didn't need to. Not with him beside her. Not with the path ahead clear in her mind. Xander reached for her hand, and this time, she laced her fingers through his without hesitation. They sat like that, quiet and certain, while the moon climbed higher and the earth softened under the promise of spring. The wagon creaked beneath the weight of lumber, metal brackets, and canvas sacks of nails, all scavenged from the far end of the ranch where Franklin let broken tools and leftover supplies rot in the lean-to. Xander had traded 3 days' labor for the right to haul it north, and Beatrice stood beside him now, hands braced on the wagon bed, studying each board with care. "We'll need to plane these before they're fit for flooring," she said, tracing a knot in the wood with her thumb. "I don't mind long work," Xander replied, "so long as it's honest." "Honest work I can do," she said. "It's the waiting that gets me." He hitched the team, adjusting the yoke strap before turning to her. "We'll go slow, but we'll go forward." She gave a short nod, then glanced toward the main house where Daisy and Daniel were helping Mrs. Halpern shell peas under the porch eaves. Daniel spotted them and waved, one hand covered in green pulp. Beatrice lifted her fingers in return, the ache in her chest quieter than it used to be. The journey north took 2 full days. They slept the first night beneath a cottonwood stand, wrapped in blankets beside a low fire while coyotes called from the hills. Beatrice kept her rifle within reach, though it was Xander's presence that steadied her. He didn't crowd her. He simply existed beside her like a tree that had always been rooted there. By midday of the second day, they reached his land. The acres unfolded in golden brush and young pine, the spring-fed creek winding through a shallow draw. It was quiet, not empty, just waiting. Beatrice stood near the wagon, watching the wind press through the grass. "It's wilder than I thought. That's why I chose it," Xander said. "No eyes but the sky." They cleared a patch near the creek where the ground sloped just enough to keep water from pooling. Beatrice marked the cabin corners with stones while Xander unloaded the boards. By late afternoon, the first beam was set, lashed upright with rope and braced with 2 stakes. "I never thought I'd be the one to raise a home," she said quietly. Xander handed her a square of bread and dried apple from the saddlebag. "You're not just raising it. You're shaping it." They ate in silence, seated on a plank balanced between 2 stumps. The sun dropped behind the ridge, casting the grass in copper light. Afterward, he spread a canvas shelter for the night, pinning the corners with rocks. Beatrice laid the children's bedding on one side and knelt to tuck them in. Daisy curled into her, warm and drowsy, while Daniel mumbled something about frogs near the creek. When she rose, Xander stood a few paces off, watching the shadows lengthen. She stepped up beside him, arms folded. "I worry they won't remember the bad years. That they'll forget what it took to reach this." "That's what we're building for," he said. so they can grow without having to. She looked over at him. And what about you? I remember enough for all of us. The words weren't bitter, just firm like a post driven true into the earth. She reached for his hand, her fingers brushing the back of his. Let's not let this slip away. He turned toward her, eyes steady. I've never held anything I wanted to keep until now. Beatrice exhaled, something long and tight letting go inside her. Then keep it with me. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But the promise passed between them, deeper than any vow spoken aloud. The stars came out sharp above the clearing, and for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of the dark. By late March, the wind carried the scent of damp pine and crushed grass, and the creek behind the cabin site swelled with meltwater. The walls were up now, rough-hewn and bare, but standing. Inside, the frame of a hearth took shape from stones they hauled one by one from the creek. Each evening, Beatrice laid the children down on straw pallets beneath the canvas shelter, then joined Xander in the half-framed room that would be theirs. They worked by lantern light, fitting boards by hand, nails held between their teeth. Her fingers had blistered and hardened, her back ached from lifting, but there was a steadiness in her now, a rhythm that hadn't been there before. Not just survival, purpose. One evening, she stood in the doorway of what would be the children's sleeping loft, watching as Xander knelt by the hearth, fitting stones into the base with practiced hands. You were taught this, she said. He glanced up, breath fogging faintly in the cool air. My uncle was a stonemason in Texas. Taught me before I was old enough to carry a hammer straight. You never spoke of him. He died in the war, Xander said, pressing a palm against the stone's edge to test its fit. Left his tools to anyone who'd keep them working. Beatrice stepped down, brushing her skirt free of sawdust. You've carried a lot from the past. That weight doesn't vanish just because we've started fresh. He looked up at her, something quiet in his expression. No. But it softens when it's shared. She crouched beside him, her hand resting on the stone he'd just set. Then let's carry it together. Outside, a screech owl called from deep in the pines. Inside, under the half-finished rafters, they sat shoulder to shoulder until the lamplight burned low. By mid-April, the cabin had a roof. Daniel and Daisy took to it like squirrels, climbing the ladder to their loft and peeking down through the rafters with whispers and giggles. Beatrice planted root vegetables and beans in a patch of cleared earth near the stream, marking each row with a thin stake and string. She'd bartered a jar of wild honey for a sack of seed potatoes from a trapper who passed through on his way to the railroad town. One afternoon, the children played along the water's edge, and Beatrice stood at the edge of the new porch, watching them with her arms folded tight against the breeze. When Xander returned from checking the snare line, he handed her a pair of worn gloves. Found these near the old fence line, he said. Thought they might fit. She pulled them on, flexing her fingers. They're mine. Lost them 3 weeks ago. He smiled faintly. Then they made their way back to where they belong. She looked up at him, sunlight catching in her eyes. So did I. He stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. I want to speak plain on something. She turned to face him fully, the wind tugging at the edge of her shawl. I've loved you since the first time I saw you stand between your children and the world, he said. And I want a life with you not out of pity, not because you need saving, but because I can't imagine peace without you in it. She reached up, fingers resting lightly at his jaw. I never thought I'd have the chance to choose love again, but I do, and I choose you. He kissed her then, slow and sure, no hesitation between them. The world fell quiet around the moment the wind, the creek, the birds, all of it hushed in witness. That summer, they were married under the cottonwoods near the stream, the children scattering wildflowers at their feet. Daisy wore a garland of woven clover, and Daniel carried 2 wooden rings Xander had carved from pine. There were no guests but the land, no music but the breeze, no vows but the ones spoken plainly, holding hands beneath the open sky. They built a life that didn't rush. Days shaped by work and quiet joy, fences mended, bread baked, evenings on the porch listening to frogs call from the shallows. The cabin filled with warmth not from the hearth alone, but from the way they spoke to one another, the way they moved through the world side by side. Beatrice taught Daisy how to sew a hem, and Xander showed Daniel how to string a fishing line and tell tracks apart in the mud. Each night, after the children were settled, they sat together near the fire, her head tucked beneath his chin, his hand resting over hers. They didn't speak much then. They didn't need to. Years passed. The garden grew wider. The roof grew moss. The children outgrew their loft and built their own places not far off. But Beatrice and Xander stayed where they were, rooted like the pines beyond the creek. One morning, with the sun just breaking over the ridge, Beatrice stood at the porch rail, one hand wrapped around a mug of chicory brew, and watched Xander walk toward her from the pasture. His shoulders still broad, his step still sure. He carried 2 eggs in his palm, still warm from the nesting box. She smiled as he reached her, still bringing me the morning first. He kissed her temple. You've always been worth waking early for. They sat together on the bench he'd built years before, their shoulders touching. The land stretched before them, familiar and full. The sky above was wide and blue and open, and the love between them, quiet and constant, held, always.